Hello, hello, everyone. I'll give everyone a moment to connect to sound.
Oh my gosh.
180th New Social Environment.
Oh my
I'm
God.
Joshua, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Mimi Gross, Susan B., and Charles Bernstein. And now I'll introduce today's hosts. Brooklyn-based artist Susan B. has had 10 solo shows at AIR Gallery. He has published 18 artist books, including collaborations with Susan Howe, Charles Bernstein, Jerome McGann, Rachel Levitsky, and Jerome Rothenberg. B's artwork is in many collections and has been widely reviewed, and she has given numerous talks in museums and galleries in the US and abroad. Poet Charles Bernstein is the winner of the 2019 Bellingen Prize for Near Miss, published by the University of Chicago Press in 2018, and for Lifetime Achievement in American Poetry. He's the author of Topsy Turvy and Pitch of Poetry. And with that, I'll pass it over to Charles, who will introduce today's guest.
Okay, I'm broadcasting, as you can see, live from Times Square. I've been here since the No Kings rally, and people are bringing me food and just keeping the vigil up against kings. I'm also against the British kings. It's so great to be here with Susan B., who's in the same building as me, but we try to keep separate floors, and also Mimi Gross, who's broadcasting from downtown Manhattan. Mimi Gross was born in 1940 in New York City, and her art is deeply rooted in the sights of our city. Her father, the internationally renowned sculptor Chaim Gross, who I am thrilled to say I got to know a little bit through Mimi, was a great experience knowing Chaim, emigrated from Eastern Europe 20 years before Mimi was born. Chaim was a voracious collector of African and oceanic art, and this work surrounded Mimi from her earliest childhood. She spent many summers in Provincetown, Massachusetts. Mimi attended high school at the High School of Music and Art, now called LaGuardia, and entered Bard College in 1957, where she studied for 2 years. Her early paintings of the 1950s and 60s explored her growing community of friends and acquaintances. In the summer of 58, Mimi lived in Provincetown and became friends with Bob Thompson, Mary Frank, Jay Milder, and Red Grooms. Red Grooms became her husband and artistic collaborator from 1960 to 76. In 1958, Milder and Grooms founded the City Gallery, an art cooperative where Mimi exhibited her work for the first time. Mimi Gross has been a leading figure in art, focusing on figurative images, while Gross's imagination of her work is that it is outside the established generational and conceptual groupings that have emerged in the New York art world. There are clear affinities with older artists like Alice Neel and Fairfield Porter. Above all, Gross expresses her connection to the poet and dance critic Edwin Denby and the photographer and filmmaker Rudy Burkhart, both of whom are crucial models for her and her close friends. Now, for the first time in more than 30 years, and on the city's 400th birthday, excerpts from Ruckus, Manhattan, two pieces from Mimi Gross and Red Groom's fantastical and hilarious collaborative tribute to New York, is showing in the lobby of the Brooklyn Museum through June 5th, 2026. So that's an extended run. It gives you time to go to see it 3 and 4 times before June 5th comes up. Ruckus Manhattan opened at the Marlborough Gallery in 1976 as a 6,400 square foot portrait of urban life created by Grooms and Gross and their collaborators in the Ruckus Construction Company. The vibrant installation satirized the city with a dynamic mix of painting and sculpture. For a high-heeled Statue of Liberty, from a high-heeled Statue of Liberty to a financial district in flames, Ruckus Manhattan's visual metaphors captured the chaos corruption, sexuality, and creativity of the 1970s New York City. So you don't want to miss that at the Brooklyn Museum in the months ahead. Mimi, welcome to the Brooklyn Rail New Environment Show.
Glad to join your group.
So now I'm taking over from that incredible introduction by Charles. He's down on the first floor. I'm on the third floor in my studio in Brooklyn. And so we want to actually show some of the slides that Mimi put together, a little slideshow starting from the early 60s. And this is the first one. And I think Mimi would like to talk a bit about how she started making this artwork. Mimi?
Yeah, I just wanted to have this sample to show how I was, from an early age, interested in the city subjects. And Horn and Harder was a place that I spent a great deal of time eating at. And it's a sample painting. But if we go to the next slide, you'll see the origins of Ruckus as a collaboration with Red. And I thought I'd focus on that since we have very little time and there's a lot to say. So these are 4 stills from the animated film Fat Feet, which is a mix of objects and people. So it took a very long time to film this, frame by frame. And that is me on the top right as a little old lady collecting garbage, and at the bottom as a drunk sitting on a stoop. The left is Val Falcone, who started the Sun Gallery in Provincetown, and that was very significant in the 50s. He showed many artists for the first time. And below was a typical newsstand. So you get an idea that this was a group project in filming it, where we had volunteer helpers, and Red and I got used to working together and having helpers. And when we start the next slide, we'll show the installations that we did together.
Yeah.
So Josh, go next. This is portrait of Chicago Historic Arch, which was mechanized and had sound and was basically a history of Chicago. And it was a centerpiece in the Chicago Ruckus show, which had about 6 sculptures. This photograph is in a show that was, what's the name? That was called 3D Chicago. And that's why it's separated. But in the installation in Chicago, it had Michigan Avenue with a portrait of the Mayor Daley, who was a controversial person at the time, and Hugh Hefner. And we had the river. I think the next slide is of the river. Next slide. This is of Chicago River. So that's a second piece from that installation. So this piece was from 67, and it was very popular. It was shown in the Venice Biennale during all of the politics of 68. So you can imagine how controversial it was.
And another thing that you might want to emphasize is the scale of these pieces, because you are always working very big. These are not small pieces, they're 6 feet. And that was also a preparation for Ruckus, which is, the pieces are actually huge. And you were never a shrinking violet in terms of size of your work, which I think is a very important thing to emphasize.
I like every size. Because all of these pieces have backs and have a lot of miniatures in it.
Yeah.
Yes, not only these were large size, but it was after doing the movie set that it was natural to do this large size. And this was you could say, a baby piece before Manhattan, which was a much larger installation. I think there were 6 or 7 sculptures in the Chicago show. Well, 2 years later, we did the discount store, which is the next slide. And this one, of course, it's impossible to have actually photographed it well, but it was huge. It was, I think, 35 feet by 35 feet. And of course, shopping carts took a lot of space. And this was also done with helpers. Only this time we had helpers who we paid. And that was a big difference. It was made in Minneapolis, and Target had just started. It was the very, very first Target store. We ended up calling it the discount store because nobody had heard of Target. And this show traveled. It was in New York on Madison Avenue in a long, skinny store. So it was changed in scales. Each time it had a different installation.
And what's interesting also is that in 1970, your daughter Saskia Grooms was born.
Or appeared,
And
yeah.
all appeared, she appeared, yes. and so during this time period where you're making these really big collaborative pieces, you were also being a mother. So
Really
that, that's a lot to realize that you were doing all this work, very large scale artwork, and taking care of Saskia.
I remember painting the wall here. She was a papoose. I had her on a carrier. I was painting around her. She was cooperating as well as she could. Also, there were several people living in our loft that I was taking care of who were our helpers.
Yeah, so you maybe we should see the astronauts, which are next.
That's the next one.
Yeah.
This piece also had even more helpers, and it was first shown in the Guggenheim Museum in a group show that was called Independence. And we actually went down to NASA, which took a lot of red tape. We had to sign documents that we weren't communists. And we were the only artists out of a group of commercial artists who were taking photographs, and they had to wait around while Red and I made drawings. But this piece traveled as well and even went to Venezuela, poor Venezuela. And it was about 16 feet high, the main astronaut, but we did all 3 of them, including the car and the moonscape. So I've actually been on the moon twice. I was on with this piece and also the movie Shoot the Moon, which was made in 1962 with Prudy.
It's written there, but just to emphasize that the height of these figures is 30 feet tall. It's quite large.
Yeah. No, he was actually, the 30 feet is the width of the.
Is the width, okay.
The 15 feet.
The height is 15.
Yeah, that was the height of Red's studio. But we were given actual astronaut cloth to use for the figures. And they gave us tons and tons of information, photos, everything. Very cooperating. But then when the pieces were offered to the Science Museum in Washington, it was rejected because they thought it was too much of a caricature. This is a really serious portrait. Anyway, the astronauts were 72, and within a very short time, we had to get bigger. We did Gotham City, which is Manhattan. And this was the very beginning. There were endless drawings for Manhattan.
So, Mimi, did you always start the pieces with drawings? Like, I know this is the drawing for the subway piece that was shown at the Marlborough Gallery when in 1976, because actually I went to that show before I knew you, and I saw that incredible piece, the subway. So I was wondering how you started to work together with Red, and how you came to make this whole gigantic installation.
Well, actually, in the film, you can see that beginning. How we both did a great deal of research. We both made drawings, and our helpers made drawings. I think Andrew Ginsel he was very early on.
Hmm.
He was doing research, and we went on the ferry a million times before we started building it. The subway was a much later piece. The ferry, I think, was the first piece we made. We were given a sensationally great space near Wall Street by Creative Time. It was a bank space in the IMP building. And so, it was a matter of filling it up. And both Brett and I had been working together for a couple of years, so it was relatively natural the way we developed it. And each of us did our separate chores. We would meet in the morning and decide what was needed for the day, and then we would meet with the group and decide who did what. And I think that's how it developed through the whole over a year for the project.
And Mimi, how many people were in the group of helpers? They are in the film that is currently showing at the Brooklyn Museum.
Yeah, there were 22 people altogether, including Red and me. And here's a copy of the Ruckus newspaper, which I think Andrew actually made. And everybody contributed to it. And it shows the gang of helpers. And you see the show, the newspapers in one of the display cases.
Maybe we'll look at the next.
All the different helpers, their little, each bio.
This is the main piece that's in the right up now in the lobby of the Brooklyn Museum, and it is quite gigantic. Maybe you could tell us a little bit.
Originally, one walked through it.
Right.
And now it's a little bit fragile, being 50 years old, and so the museum decided they had a lot of restoration to do with the help of Tom Burkhart, who went over all of the diagrammatic pictures for putting it together again. So it was in storage. But the public walked across the middle of the ferry onto a bridge where the Statue of Liberty was on one side. Here's Statue of Liberty. And on the other side was Wall Street, the skyline of Manhattan. And is basically an environment that was natural, and also the World Trade Towers, which was 20 feet high, and one of them you could climb up and look out.
So a lot of the stuff you could, when like the subway car, I think I entered into it, and they were very accessible. They felt almost like carnival rides, I think.
Well, the subway car was made last, and it was the entrance to the show. You went through a turnstile. This was the installation I was talking about before was in the space where we were working. That moved to Marlborough Gallery, and at Marlborough Gallery, the subway was added. And one walked through a turnstile and paid a quarter and entered the subway and the station. And I don't know if you remember this, but the back of the train had the word screech to make the sound of the train. But there was the token booth was another sculpture, and it had two naked figures that were life-size. I don't know if you remember that as a child, but you walked through the subway and it wobbled. It had these metal spirals under the floor so that it would go back and forth.
Well, it was a very striking, I was in my 20s when I saw it, and I was studying minimalists. And so it was just so great to see this like carnivalesque, just so humorous, so engaged with the city, so personal in a way. Having as also a native New Yorker, it has a really good feeling for the city itself. And I think the piece, it's great to see the two parts of it that we are being allowed to see at the Brooklyn Museum.
Well, my daughter, Saskia, our daughter Saskia said that as humorous as it all was equally dark. You know, it was a hard
Yeah.
time in New York, and we were
Mm.
at a different perspective. You know, that wasn't only the humor was to be light and for people to enjoy looking at it, but the dark part was equally there. There was a lot of poverty and homelessness, and on the steps of Wall Street, we had a homeless guy laying around with a bottle of whiskey next to George Washington.
And the store in the back is somewhat dark. We're seeing this in the front, but in the Brooklyn Museum
The
show.
next slide, we should look at the shop that's in the back of the Brooklyn Museum.
Yes, this is, you have to be 18 to go in.
Do you want to talk a little about what?
This is interesting technique wise because it's all in reverse vinyl painting, you know, which I really advocated. The figures that surround the bookstore were made by our friend KK, and I think that's important to note. But this was a sample of going uptown. We really were focused mainly on the downtown financial district, but we had token pieces. It was the Chinatown piece, just to have something of it, and a little bit of Times Square, which included the bookstore and a piece called Girls, Girls, Girls. A lot of the pieces have been destroyed, unfortunately, and so we just have these rare photos. But the bookstore survived, and the Alex Katz Foundation gifted this sculpture to the Brooklyn Museum. So it's now its collection.
And also, I should say that when you go to the Brooklyn Museum, you can actually enter, if you're over 18, you can enter into the bookstore, and it's very amusing to be inside there. You have all the book titles. It's very cartoony, and it's dark, and but it also with humor.
Yeah, it's meant to liven things up. Exactly.
I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about your issues with getting credit for this piece.
Well, I'm thrilled that the Brooklyn Museum gave me equal credit. I mean, if one read the newspaper and saw the work, the film, they would realize that I did collaborate equally on the piece, but I was always called the director's director. But I'm truly thrilled that finally I have complete credit. And it's best not to look back. So
yeah, but I think it's very important to emphasize that for a number of years you were not fully credited as
basically 50 years.
For 50 years you weren't credited. That's 50
including
years, a long time,
including the Whitney Museum of American Art when it showed this work.
And Grand Central Station that had the entire Ruckus Manhattan, and my name was the size of one typewritten word.
So
so
it's great to have this acknowledged and to celebrate your wonderful contribution, but also worth noting that history.
Yes, thank you. Kimberly Gunt was the curator for this installation, and she graciously was glad to put my name together. So I'm grateful for that.
Well, and actually, though I don't want to pursue it beyond, it's legally required now.
That's right. Yeah. We won't get into that.
Well, I think the legalities of it are interesting, just as during the 70s, being a woman collaborator with a man, and the Marlborough Gallery being very male oriented at the time. You know, it was a real important thing that you should get credit for this work. And
also, Marlborough Gallery refused to put my name on it.
That's what I'm attempting to
have no selling power if both names were on it.
So this is the history of of women's work. You know, I mean, I do a lot of collaborations that I'm always trying to make sure my name is.
Well, you're a modern person, Susan.
I'm very modern, yes. Maybe I'm very postmodern. Anyway, so we want to actually move on to some of your other.
After Ruckus, I was still thinking large, and one of the first projects, Josh, if you could go to the next slide, please, Oh, this is the Statue of Liberty, which
Yeah.
I had a contest to pick the model for it because we were working in a bank space. The whole neighborhood looked in and watched us working. And so we found a most beautiful young lady who came and posed. This piece has survived all the damages, so it's available for sale in case anyone's interested. But I was going to move on to
Yeah.
the next project after
Next.
Ruckus. Yes. Actually, this was during Ruckus, but it was a separate piece.
Yep.
While we were making Ruckus, Manhattan, Red and I both were making pieces for the Great American Rodeo show that was in Texas. And so these are over life-size plexiglass figures that are painted in reverse and were recently shown in one of the Chicago freeze type shows.
Yeah. We actually want to go to slide 12, which is the Big Apple Circus, if you can see that one. Yeah, so Mimi's worked with the Big Apple Circus in 1977. So
when it started,
that's when you started.
Met Richard Levy and Paul Binder on the street, and they asked me if I was a Carney person. I said, for sure. Next thing you knew, I was doing all the decorations. So the tent, which was the original tent in the landfill down at Lower Manhattan, it was 18 feet high, and you walked through it to enter the circus. And then there were the flats along the tent, and inside were decorations as well. It was great. That was the very, very beginning of Big Apple Circus. And these were up for about 5 years on the tent.
Whatever happened to the original art, do you know?
Well, I have 3 of the paintings, and Big Apple has one of them, and Bellevue Hospital has the painting of Philippe Petit, as he was part of the group.
Fantastic. I guess from there, we might want to go to slide 15, the servicemen. Okay, so this is a political piece that you might want to tell us about.
This was shown in the Times Square show, which was a kind of interesting moment in my life because I met a whole group of collab artists that was a new generation of friends. They were contemporary with most of our helpers. So I was kind of older than everyone, but I suddenly had a new world of friends who were involved with political art, but as well as contemporary materials. These are all ceramic stoneware. John Ahern organized a show in a building on 41st Street and 7th Avenue. It was like 5 stories, absolutely bursting full of lively work by a great group of young artists. I was happy to be part of it. And it kind of gave me a push into a new world after the Ruckus world. What's like?
Oh, yeah. No, I think I remember seeing this piece in situ, and it was in a very rundown kind of part of Times Square, where Times Square got its makeover to be, what it is now.
It had been a flop house. They threw out something like 50 mattresses and cleaned up the place. And 41st and 7th is quite different now.
Yes, exactly. It's not the same place that we used to know as the grim Times Square. So I also want to talk about slide 16, the next slide, I believe. So this is a huge piece of yours that maybe you could tell us, because you worked on it for a year. And it's in your studio.
Yeah, in the interim time between doing the ceramic pieces and this piece, I did a lot of portraits of friends. And then I moved into a big loft where I still live. And it was the first big piece that I did in this empty space, thinking, oh, I'll do a big piece and I'll sell it and then I'll do more, but it never got sold. And I have it still. And it was all the materials that I had used up to that time. And it was also a return to using oil paint because the Ruckus pieces were basically acrylic paint. And friends posed for it. It's based on Delacroix's Women of Algiers, the composition. And
Well, I'm going to come back to this in a minute. Maybe you could speak about the dimensionality, 2 to 3 to 2.5. That's because this is the first piece that has that cutout quality to it.
that's a
Not
good,
quality, cutout
yeah, I had
reality.
models at that time, and the models kind of developed into this. And it was a way of being three-dimensional without being literally three-dimensional. I called it 2.5D. And it's kind of like a stereopticon. It's a layered dimensionality.
So
Yes.
I hope viewers who are just seeing it in 2 dimensions could see that these are actually cut out figures and that there's physical space between
Yeah.
them and between the front and the back of the painting because it is somewhat flattened out in the photo, and it's a
Great,
trompe l'oeil
great.
because even when you see it, it looks like you're imagining that it's 3D, but it also is in some depth, shallow depth.
Well, I've always been interested in how little it takes to make a depth. Just the smallest amount of difference in space makes it look a lot deeper than it is, which is like stereopticons.
And it's also a very colorful, I mean, we haven't really talked about color in your work, but as we go through the other slides, I think slide 18, which is also a portrait of Carol Armitage.
Yeah, but before that, could you go back one
Back to
slide?
17, yeah.
These are other pieces that show the 2.5D.
Oh.
And they were a group of proverbs that I did at the same time as that larger piece.
And they sort of look like little stage sets or sort of dioramas.
They're not that little, but yes.
And we're contrasting, of course, the 3D of the Ruckus pieces, which are full 3D, to this invention of Mimi Gross's of 2.5D, which also occurs, as we'll see in a minute, in the Times Square painting. What's the backdrop of my my image here?
These were all proverbs. And again, I was experimenting with different materials. There's aluminum and there's wood and there's plexiglass.
So you were doing paintings of, as I recall, like in Bruegel, of each of the proverbs that you selected.
Well, I started to.
Yeah, I started to, and I did too, influenced by you. I also you encouraged me to try to do it at the same time.
So I wanted to go to the next slide just so we can make sure that we talk about your work in relation to, well, portraits and dancers, which are two of the main important things that you've been working on.
Well, Carol was actually working downstairs in my building. She did a piece called Drastic Classism, and she was working with Charlie Atlas. And so I said, well, why don't you come up? And I did her portrait. And she's wearing a costume that Charlie Atlas actually designed. And we became friends. And yes, I've been involved with dancers all along. And the next slide is of the sculpture that I made after doing the drawing. And so it's another example that I've always made drawings and models before making other pieces.
And this is also quite a large piece. It's a standing piece with Carol Armitage, right? And that who's on her shoulder? There's like another figure.
Actually, that got eliminated. It was something. Oh, it had some.
I like the funny juxtaposition. And I think then we might want to talk about the Times Square piece that Charles is talking about next, or if you.
Yeah, so you'll see another version in the back, and I was just mentioning to Mimi that the way that the Zoom technology puts my face in the front, in place of these people in the back, creates another trompe l'oeil that's relevant to your explorations, although it's a very crude one, but still it is a similar optical effect. So this one is, of course, not, these are not cutout figures, but you're using the same exploration of deep space
And they were
in it.
added after the fact. Like I had
Yeah,
the whole painting, black and white, of the street scene, which was done
yeah.
on the Times Square building. It was for a cabaret on Times Square that became bankrupt, and it was black and white. And after it was bankrupt, I got all my artwork back. So then
Yeah.
I finished it and had the people come and pose. So they were added after the painting actually was painted.
And
So I'm,
this is a very large painting. 96 by
wow.
167 inches. So almost like a backdrop. It almost feels like a stage set itself.
That's what it was in the cabaret, which was on 43rd Street. It was called O'Neill's Cabaret.
Oh.
So I'm interested also in the Grand Canyon effect in the sense of this sublime depth. That's you see it even in this reproduction, but in the painting, it's even more preternatural. But to have that kind of depth going back in the crack. Now, this three-dimensional stereo is another way to put it. Perception in your work is built, as you've told me, from the superimposition of 2D shots. You call that's your word, or planes. And then this is a quote from you. It's remarkable, and you said this yourself just a minute ago. It's remarkable how even the slightest indication of 3D makes something appear 3D. And you note that even a slight building up off of the two-dimensional pictorial plane with wood, aluminum, or clay significantly intensifies the depth effect. Quote, that's something Cézanne and Matisse understood perfectly. And I'm interested in this going back to Cézanne and his really invention of this kind of space and thinking about, how you look at this question of 3D, 2.5D, from the Ruckus actual 3D to the cutouts to a painting like this, which appears 3D, but is actually on a single pictorial plane.
Well, it's complicated because Cezanne invented one thing and then Matisse reinvented it again. But it, of course, goes back to Byzantine art a little bit and Cubism a little bit. But Cezanne figured out a way to make all of his image important. It wasn't like having a central focus and then a background. And that makes it dimensional. The more you fill in a space, then you have the choices of where things are placed. Matisse turned it around again and he made it flatter, but in the way that I like to cut things out. He did it with his line drawings. So this extreme simplification of a complicated thought. And I don't know if we have time to really.
Well, it's
Well, we at least noted. I mean, these are major art historical issues. I would also note something that I've learned a great deal from you about, and I write about too, is the false dichotomy between abstraction and figuration. And maybe we don't have to discuss it except to say that here. You can see many elements in this painting, as you mentioned with Cubism or the other art historical references you make, that could be described as abstraction. And yet, of course, the painting would be viewed as figurative. And so, but it really breaks down through the use of the dimensionality, this problematic distinction between figuration and abstraction, because depending on how you look at it and where you focus your eyes, it's figurative or abstract.
Well, the minute you go up close to the canvas, it's all abstract, or the brush against the canvas itself as it pushes the paint on
Yeah,
is an abstract exercise.
right. And it counts on that. It's a tour de force of toggling between the so-called abstract and the so-called figurative,
Totally,
so that it constantly emerges and the space keeps changing in a dynamic way. So what we're talking about 2D and 3D, but we're also talking about temporal. You look at this painting and it's moving constantly. It's a very temporal experience, like walking through a space, even though, as far as I know, it's existing in a static space in its physical reality. It doesn't feel like that when you look at it. It looks like a moving image.
well, it's Times Square.
So I think we have to move on if we want to get to the portraits
Okay.
And the dancers.
and the dancers. Well, right.
This
So this
other large piece that was post Ruckus, that was part of, I don't remember the group of people actually. It was at Ward's Island and it was there for years. It was made out of recycled materials.
And then I guess next slide, I'm not sure which one. Oh, right. This actually is about one of your 2 or 3D pieces.
Yeah, this was a political piece. It was after the riot in Tompkins Square. And I used the extraordinary Poussin work called The Rape of Sabine Women. And I used that composition in making the riot that was in Tompkins Square, which I call Who's Fucking Park, a title that Jacob Burckhardt made up because he was a witness. And Poussin himself made wooden models. And so I was very inspired by that.
Yeah, I think these are great pieces. And also wanted to get to slide 23, which is, I think, the next one, because you also made this.
That was an elaborate example of making it 2.5D in a 3D space. And it was a very large space at Municipal Art Society.
Yeah.
It was around 30 by 30. And they're all portraits of the people who made this community park.
So I love that you come back to that in other works like the Pilgrim work, which we'll see. But by the 2.5D, you mean that it's the flat figures within the actual 3D that creates this kind of op art, mind bending optical experience.
The woman standing in the grass was the principal of a school across the street. This was a propaganda piece that was a real park that was in a pocket lot in Harlem. And the group wanted people to know about it, knowing that people didn't go up to Harlem. So they had the piece in Municipal Art Society and later in the bus station. But they're all portraits of real people that participated.
Which is amazing, because then you continue on, like, if we go to slide 25, with a big group portrait, which this big group portrait of Arlene Ravens, I guess it was a women's group that visited your studio.
They were a group that got together with Arlene for 20 years and went to different galleries and museums, and Arlene would do an art lecture. And they came here to see the drawings, which Charles would talk about from some of these days. And I was doing portraits. And I said, well, why don't we do all of them? And everybody came and posed. And it took years to do this painting.
And it's a huge painting, and it's very, very detailed. It's 114 by 159 inches. And it took up a giant wall in your loft studio, which because you worked on it for so long also.
Some of the people posed several times. Some of the people posed once. And Nancy Grossman, who's in the corner, she didn't pose. She was living with Arlene at the time. She was really busy. And Arlene died by the time the painting was finished. So I gave it to Micah, where Arlene was teaching for many years. And that's me on the top right painting, like a Renaissance painting when the artist would put themselves in it.
Oh, that's fantastic. I never even noticed that.
I never noticed that either.
That has a film of making this painting with everybody came together, and Albert Maysles and Julie Mard, several people filmed it. And it shows this extraordinary physical thing that a whole section was added on the bottom from the knees to, something like 14 feet by a foot was added, and it's in the film how we sewed the canvas together so I could finish the painting.
That's a fantastic piece. And it brings me to your other portraits, which I want to leave time. Oh, actually, one thing we really need to talk about, and I think maybe we have to go over to slide 40 34 for your Douglas Dunn collaborations,
yes.
because this is such a major part of your work.
Yes.
And you did the costumes, the sets, the
I just wanted to say that this finally was able to be really three-dimensional again. That I
right. This was real three-dimensional.
This was a piece called Skid that traveled to Paris, and Douglas had started his company and was just adding more dancers than himself. And so it was wonderful. When I did these costumes, I wanted to do something that I had never seen before. So it was very challenging.
And then from there, let's go to the next one. So you've worked with him from since 1979 up till the present, and you're planning another piece with him in the spring.
In April, that we think, as of last night, it will also be in the fall. It'll be
Oh, great. And they're wonderful. I can highly recommend seeing these pieces in person because, of course, the music and the dancing and seeing the costumes and the sets in motion.
Actually, Douglas choreographed Pulcinella originally for the Paris Opera, and then he translated it, did it in New York. And Carol Armitage was the main dancer with him. That's Douglas and Carol in the top photo. He then recreated this dance again. The costumes were recycled.
Great. So we will look at the next one. We put in a number of slides from these.
This was in the kitchen. It was called Matches, and it was very, very elaborate. I made a 60-foot lake out of cardboard, and it was based on a Japanese ghost stories. So they're in kimonos, beautiful silk kimonos.
Yeah,
and
the colors and the fabrics are always so well chosen, and you really have a great crew of people to help you, I hope, sew all of these costumes, right?
Yes, yes, and help build things. The tree house, the tree was filled the whole kitchen, and the tree house was in it, and two of the dancers drink tea, and you see them in silhouette.
Beautiful. I guess next one.
This Sky Eye traveled as well, and it had several versions, but it had a 60-foot set that was, I called it Ghost Mountain, and I had a lot of help building it. I was given a fantastic empty space on the Lower East Side where it was built, just made out of copper tubing and scrim, and I had at least 3 or 4 sewers working with me. The two had several versions. One version was without a set at St. Mark's Church. You can see the costumes were very bright colors. I learned to use dyes. I use the Aljo dyes that Charlie Atlas told me about, and their colors are just magnificent. Orange, yellow, pinks.
I guess next one. Oh yeah, this is
what Charlie did. Charlie Atlas designed the costumes for this dance, and I did this very elaborate set. What Douglas gives minimal amount of directions. He said he wanted the set to appear and then disappear and then appear again each 20 minutes. So this is when it was disappeared, and it was all on pulleys and would rise up to the sky of St. Mark's Church.
Fantastic. Okay,
yeah.
Let's see. Oh, this one, I saw this one. It was so beautiful. Flowers were so, it was wonderful to see the costumes and the way the dancers interacted with the flowers that were on the ground.
Yeah, and that the audience sat in the round.
We were very close to it, which made it really great.
Again, I dyed the costumes. They were beautiful colors.
Yeah. Next slide. Oh, well.
This dance, I think you also saw. It's called the Garden Party.
It's fantastic. And one thing you're
This
kind of missing is the great sound and movement, it's
and the lights, yeah, they were
light.
spectacular.
Yeah, great lighting too.
A wonderful lighting artist called Lauren Parrish. And we're going to work again in the spring with Jacob Burkhart. But Lauren did the lighting for this, which added a dimension that no one expected. This is a great example of collaboration that nobody knew how this would come out till there it was.
Mm.
And I was painting the mirror. I didn't know how it would look when it was finished, and so on. I had a lot of help with the cutouts.
So I know what's next. Let's see. We're coming to the end. This is the last piece you did with Ruckus, right?
Yeah, this was like the maximum color for leotards. And that's Anne Waldman on the bottom reciting poetry, with Douglas and Grazia surrounding her. And it was at Judson Church this past winter. Beautiful dance.
Yeah, very beautiful.
Beautiful. Each dancer is really contributes to the beauty of it. They're marvelous dancers.
And
some of them have their own companies, like Christopher Williams has his own company, and Jinju Begin, she has her own company. They're very professional.
okay, so I think we're gonna get to, oh my, well,
Okay, so we're
I
condensing,
guess, yeah,
and I know you're going to think I'm making a mistake with the number, but we're condensing 70 years of work into a very short period of time. And but I wanted to dwell on portraits, which in some ways might be the thing that was the mainstay in Mimi Gross's work, but we didn't so much focus on it here. And you can see Susan on the left, and you can see my son Felix and me. And you'll notice, because now you're seeing me in a photograph, that I actually look like the painting. I don't look like what you're seeing in the zoom
Except
lens.
you're
That's
not
the
wearing
distortion.
glasses.
But the actual way I look is here. Um, so I wanted to ask you a little bit about your philosophy of portraits, which we've talked a lot about, what it is to make a portrait. You like the quote from your friend Edwin Denby, an object magic as a private face. So I'm interested in this idea of private face, which is what I mean by, do you look like the way a photograph would look of you, or do you look, is it a private face that you bring out?
Well, it's an
That there's something
invasion.
else that happens.
It's an invasion of a person's privacy to do their portrait. As it is looking at ourselves on the screen, suddenly strangers are looking at us on Zoom. And doing a portrait is a little like that. And I really love the psychology of it and the intensity and the collaboration of it. Because if you're posing, you're also collaborating. And in this case, the portrait of Susan, I think, was done like 10 years after the one of you and Felix. Felix is now a professor himself. He's 30 years old.
Yeah.
Beard. He's 6 feet tall.
yeah,
That is true. And we did this over many sessions with multiple feet.
It's not the little laptop boy like that.
Your portraits, not just these, which we're showing because it's us, but the overall, the hundreds of portraits that you've done, reference the tradition that goes back to Roman busts and sarcophagi, but
Egyptian Mayan portraits, which I love.
and also August Sandler, who you mentioned, the modernist German photographer. For Sandler, you say, and I'm quoting from you, everyone is part of the society. And I wanted to read that quote because it speaks of everything that we showed today, that the individual image is part of a society. It's not by itself. Sandler articulated the relation of the individual portrait to the gallery of other portraits he had made, something that relates closely to your own work.
This is so he was so inspiring because he really believed in everybody and tried to photograph everybody in his lifetime. And this was something that was true in all the Ruckus work of that. It was seeing the world democratically of rich and poor being equal. Yes.
So because we're condensing so much, we could think of this really as a total work of art, not totalizing, but all of these different parts coming together in this unsummarizable ensemble of
whole bunch
moving
of
relationships
slides.
between things. Maybe let's go to the next slide because this recent work is just this is you a few months ago. You
Yeah.
were flown to the Netherlands, and what were you doing there?
I was joining my graffiti friend Steve Powers, who was asked to paint portraits in a small museum in the town of Breda in the Netherlands. He has painted walls all over the world, but they wanted us to paint in the museum, and he had never made portraits from life, just always from photographs. And so I was being his teacher, as it were. So I've done it a lot.
And
And it's
people just
amazing.
came to you and you did
Walked,
portraits of them.
yeah, the place was on the ground floor. I
Yeah.
think it's their gift shop, and people wandered in. The young girl with the brown pants, she was Turkish, and she was an intern at the museum. And the young man next to her worked at a bookstore down the street. And his girlfriend was a volunteer at the museum. And the guy with the bicycle, well, he owned the bike shop down the street.
And there's an
That's me.
example of what you mean by the slightest indication of 3D gives the 3D. Just by putting the bicycle on that other wall, it actually looks like the middle where the seat is 3D. But of course, that's trompe l'oeil.
That we've really skipped about 10 slides.
We have, we could possibly go back to those slides while I read this final, but let's go to the next slide. So this is something that Mimi and I did together. She was down at the site of the World Trade Center. They let her in as a kind of press person, so she was down there doing hundreds of drawings, and this is a reverse one. And then I had written some things about that, and we collaborated by taking my writing. But very important to me was Mimi's handwriting, because I'm really interested in the relationship of handwriting to the line in drawing. And I think you can almost see it there, that think of the calligraphy in a way of her handwriting relating to the strokes of the 9/11. This is a book, Some of These Days, which you can see fully online. We've given you a link where you can look it up. You can see the whole PDF.
It's one of my favorite quotes, Charles. I've actually
Yes.
written it separately and have it up in my studio. The question isn't, is art, whoops, got covered up.
What is
It's
art
because-
up to this? But what is art for? What else is art for?
What else is art for?
What else is art for? Right. I think that's a great place to stop. I mean, I'd love to cover
Yeah,
more
well, I'm going
things,
to read the poem that Mimi asked me to read, but you could go back.
but we want to leave time. No, we want to leave time for questions, which because it's
I think
almost
we're all right.
two.
This will take only 3 or 4 minutes to read the
wanted
poem,
to
but you
show
can go
you-
back over the slides
So
if you want, or just go focus on me. But I'm going to do the poem. But I think you want to just go backwards through the slides as I read this. A
That's
brief
right.
history of, so this is 7 charms for Mimi. Try to be as close to what you see and think at the same time. At the same time, be close to what you see and try to think as. See and think as close to the time. Try to be what you act. See as close to and think at the same time what you try to be. To be close as think, see to, time, what and at the same you try. As close to the same you see time, think at, and try to be what? Try to be as close to what you think and feel at the same time. A brief history of nonlinear perspective, or how I learned to love deep space while skewering rationalized perception. Paolo Uccello's Torque and Spears, Nicolas Poussin's Neoclassicism, Courbet's Wetness, Delacroix's Color, Manet's Sleight of Hand, Cézanne's Volume, Picasso's Ingenuity, Giacometti's Negative Space, Matisse's Lightness. I'm totally an abstract artist totally. I'm totally abstract. I am an artist, abstract, totally. I'm artist, totally artist. I'm abstract, classical. If you want to catch a moment, you have to strip time and sentimentality away. Romantic, purely what something is, awe of nature, appearance, beyond ourselves. Carefully look at the light and shadows, shapes, therefore, likeness and character, structure, color, texture. I want any of the parts to look like, combine all the elements so that they can exist. Drawing a constant practice, a practice of constancy. And the final section, a quote from Dominique Fourcade, the arduous path of appearance.
What a great description. Thank you. It's fresher than ever.
A lot of that, of course, coming from long conversations with Mimi as I was
It's
writing
a
it.
catalog that Charles wrote the text for, and Dominique wrote a preface. It was really in the early, when was it? 2002. Charm of the Many.
Charm of the Many.
Thank you for writing that. And so the audience saw a sort of overview of some of the other slides, which were all different projects over time.
I wish we could have covered everything. It was just like so immense that, but you do have a very good website, and a lot of your work is up online. So I think people can find it. Plus, of course, going to the Brooklyn Museum and seeing the things in person, which are over life size, and
Film.
and also the film. There's a wonderful film that's in its own room right behind where the big ferry is, and it's a record of everybody who worked on the piece and how it was made.
And it shows the 15 pieces that were in the show.
Yeah, the pieces that aren't in the Brooklyn Museum.
Right.
So
I hope there's some questions or comments.
Thank you so, so much, Susan, Charles, and Mimi, for that amazing conversation. I feel like we covered so much ground. There are a few questions right now that are queued up here, but if anyone in the audience has a question that they would like for Mimi to answer, there is a link in the chat right now where you can submit your questions. Our first question comes from Mala, and Mala writes, "What are you working on now, Mimi? What's next?"
Oh, I'm doing a portrait of the Canal Street pocketbook sellers. And actually, Ava Burkhardt is my helper. She made all the pocketbooks and sunglasses and watches, and I'm working on the figures. But as of last week, the piece has a new motivation, which is that there was a raid by the ICE people. And so it was very scary. There were about 50 soldiers in their black masks and their terrorist costumes. And they did arrest 9 or 10 people. And so I'm adding that to the piece. I don't know if we'll ever get finished, but working on it.
what size are the figures? Are small, right?
They're all different sizes. They start really little and then they get to be this big.
So it's a 3D piece or a 2D piece.
2.5D, it's on the wall, at least so far.
Great.
Because it also looks good on a tabletop. So I think it will be on the wall though. It's changing its size with the new subject.
Thank you so much for that answer, Mimi. Our next question comes from Steve, who's wondering if the film can be seen online somewhere for the benefit of out-of-towners.
I don't know. I don't know if it's online.
And then our
But-
next,
But you can see films of Mimi's at Penn Sound, and I think we have that link. So if you go just type the word Penn Sound and then Mimi Gross, you'll find a whole bunch of videos related to her.
And we
Perhaps
made, we
not that
made,
Brooklyn Museum item.
we made 15 films, and the Ruckus Manhattan film, I just have half of it. But if I had the whole thing, I'd give it to Penn Sound. And I've talked to the Brooklyn Museum about getting a copy of it. I think you could write to the Brooklyn Museum and ask them about if it's available.
But great to see Mimi's films, which and also some of the films that she collaborated on with Red Grooms, and also she's in some of George Kuchar's films. So there are some great
And
films
Rudy
to look
Burkhart.
at. And absolutely Rudy Burkhart.
Yeah. Lurk, Miracle on the BMT. Shoot the Moon.
Yes, the link to the Penn Sounds page for Mimi is now in the chat if you're curious and want to see some of those videos. Our next question comes from an audience member who's curious about the way that vantage point relates to your installation works. They note that the Chicago River is vertical, but in the piece, the perspective looks down at the river from above.
Yeah.
How does vantage point play a role in your work?
It's just a way of developing from drawings to see what's the most interesting to do. You know, try to do everything differently all the time. So I don't know if it's that self-conscious.
And something that I'm curious about, Mimi, is I know that you've spoken a little bit about drawing from life as opposed to drawing from photography.
Yes.
I'm curious about sort of what you see as the most striking difference between working from photos versus working from real life.
Oh, I have a lot to say about that. For one thing, from life, you get the nuance. A figure is moving every second, the face is moving every second. A photograph is a still moment. And of course, it's totally valid. And it is valid to work from photographs, but doesn't get that urgency that I've taught observation as a thing to teach in art school, to try to develop being able to use your hands to what you see, as opposed to photographs.
Thank you so much, Mimi, for all of those responses, and thank you for all the questions from the audience. Thank you, Susan, Charles, and Mimi for this, again, wonderful conversation. We'd also like to thank Ava for their support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art and Tiger Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 25 years now, and a donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're available tomorrow, join us at 1 p.m. for a conversation with A. Monty, Aaron Honeycutt, Katarina Ludwig, and Cole Swenson on Cut Press, a publishing project based in Berlin. And as is Rail tradition, we now invite you to unmute your mic as you leave and say hello and goodbye.
I just wanted to add that if there are other questions, one could write to me and I'd be happy to answer.
We love to write to you.
Great
Thank
conversation,
you
you
so much.
guys.
Thank you, Mimi. Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you.
Everybody. Thank you. Thank
That's so
you.
amazing.
Thank you. We love you.
Charles.
Thank
That was
you.
congratulations.
I can't wait to go back and see the show again.
Congratulations. Gotta go to see the show.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you,
Guys.
Mimi.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you,
Bye,
everyone.
Charles and Susan. Bye, Mimi.
Bye, Mimi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye.
strangers.
Bye, bye.
Oh, what a nice way to
Bye.
end.
It was great.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much, Susan and Charles. Thank you, Mimi.
Thank you.
Mimi, thanks.
Thanks, Susan and Charles.
Thank you. Great to see
you.
you.